Hey, how you doing guys, and welcome to another video. I'm StarForceOne, and today I'm taking over for Meg as she's busy fighting off Jawas outside of the Mos Eisley Cantina, or as she likes to call it, a typical Tuesday. Today we're going to be talking about Hera Syndulla and how she lost her Ryloth accent, which is just a French accent. We'll also be doing a deep dive into why Twi'leks even have French sounding accents in the first place. So without much further ado, let's get into it. By the time we see Hera in Star Wars Rebels, she very clearly has an American accent, although it slips into a French one when she talks with her father Cham, and when she shows some anger. Episode 11 of The Bad Batch gave us an awesome prequel to Rebels, and showed us a considerable backstory to Hera and her upbringing on Ryloth. Aside from her dreams of becoming a pilot, and the fact that we got to see her mother Eleni for the first time, another very interesting thing about the episode was her accent, especially when contrasted to the one she would later adopt during Rebels. Hera's accent growing up is very much in line with that of the other Twi'leks that we've met in the Star Wars universe. It can best be described as a French accent. Almost all Twi'leks keep their accents when they leave Ryloth, so how did Hera lose hers, and why do they have those accents to begin with? According to the Clone Wars and Bad Batch executive producer Dave Filoni, the French-inspired accent was specifically requested by George Lucas when a voice was finally given to Twi'lek Jedi General Aayla Secura. In the Bad Batch, we see that most of the citizens of Ryloth have the same accent, so essentially the answer is very much an out-of-universe one. George Lucas was known to ascribe a single accent to an entire species, which is what he did with the Twi'leks, and the Neimoidians are another good example. So if losing the standard Twi'lek accent is so difficult, how did Hera shed hers so well? The answer is that based on what we know from other canon sources, it's pretty likely that Hera will soon leave Ryloth for good, and with her being off-world for so long, it's pretty likely that the accent she picked up from a young age will start to slip away, and she'll pick up one of the standard accents of Galactic Basic. Especially since she is about to go out on so many adventures with standard Galactic Basic speakers, which mostly have American accents. This influence will cause her to slowly but surely shed her accent and develop the one we hear in Star Wars Rebels. The reason it's so difficult for other Twi'leks is because many of them remain on Ryloth for their whole lives, and when they do leave, it isn't permanent or at such a young age where they can be influenced by other accents. So with that question answered, now we're going to look at exactly what happened to Hera after the Bad Batch and before Star Wars Rebels. While the Bad Batch will continue to show us details of her youth, at least for one more episode, canonically we do know a little bit more. Hera Syndulla's early adventures can be found in the novel A New Dawn, which was published in 2014 by John Jackson Miller and takes place about 6 years before the events of Star Wars Rebels. At this stage, Hera had become a well-known smuggler and of course a pilot. To add to her resume, within the rebellion she was also an associate of Fulcrum, who I'm sure you all know by now is the undercover name of Ahsoka Tano. According to the novel, Hera only leaves her home planet in 12 BBY, which is about 7 years after the events of the Bad Batch. This indicates that while the Bad Batch might chime in and help rescue her and her parents, she'll likely remain on Ryloth and help her father and uncle to fight the Empire as part of the Free Ryloth Movement. During this period, Hera was training and expanding her natural talents as a pilot. As for her parents, we know the fate of Cham and Eleni Syndulla, based on mentions and references in Star Wars Rebels, and of course the 2015 canon novel Lords of the Sith. And let's just hope that one hasn't been retconned. It does look like Orn Fritar's body was moving, and he did say attempted assassination, so let's just hope he's alive. While Cham survives the early Imperial attacks, Eleni is killed at some point in the very near future during the Ryloth insurgency. Meg spoke about this in depth in her full episode breakdown, so make sure you go and check that out. As you would expect, the death of Eleni tore Cham's heart in two and led him to become very steadfast in his ambitions. This in turn damaged his relationship with Hera, and the tension that this created is what led her to leave Ryloth for good. It is possible that the Bad Batch may continue to add depth to Hera's backstory and also show more of the origins of Cham's insurgency on her homeworld. Simultaneously, it might choose to retcon certain elements of the novel. This show sadly hasn't shied away from doing that for other pieces of Star Wars canon so far. But either way, it's very unlikely that the Bad Batch would contradict elements of Rebels, since it establishes what Hera and her father were up to as her father continued to fight against the Empire. One thing that does feel inevitable though is the upcoming death of Eleni, Hera's mother. It seems like Dave Filoni is not going to miss the opportunity to show her eventual fate, especially since it ties directly into Rebels. A larger question is whether or not Hera's destiny lines up with that of Omega. The two seem to have started a bond and friendship, and this might eventually tie into the Mandoverse and the Book of Boba Fett later on. After all, both Hera and Omega are characters that many fans want to see brought into live action. So I really hope you enjoyed that little bit of background on Hera, and a big thank you again to Meg for having me on. If you want to check out my channel, the name is StarForceOne, where I'm uploading daily Star Wars lore content, so check the link in the description below for that, and thanks to Meg once again.
Hello everyone, it's me Meg, and I want to give a huge shout out to StarForceOne for helping me to make this video. At this point, I'm going to be taking over and doing a deep dive into accents within the Star Wars universe more broadly. The first half of this video covered Hera Syndulla and the Twi'leks, but what about other species and how accents were chosen for them? The concept of accents within the Star Wars universe is a pretty interesting one. On the one hand, it makes sense that such diversity does exist, but on the other, it breaks the fourth wall, because the accents of the Star Wars universe are heavily inspired by those here on Earth in the real world. It's safe to say that while Star Wars has produced many of its own unique languages, unlike other sci-fi franchises, there are not too many unique accents. Most of them have been largely reduced to that of Earth, especially when we see alien species speaking Galactic Basic. Given George Lucas's own background in cultural anthropology, this makes a lot of sense, because he wanted the mythology within the galaxy far, far away to represent a message that is accessible to everyone. Now, what's particularly fascinating are the dialects of Galactic Basic, and how George Lucas took accents from the real world and reimagined them to represent certain species or regions. As my good friend StarForceOne established, Twi'leks had French accents, but what about other species from other planets? Let's look at an example. Even though both Ewan McGregor and Ian McDiarmid are Scottish, you'll notice that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Palpatine speak with very posh English accents. Simply put, dialects in English correspond to different in-universe accents in the movies. The English accent that we hear from Obi-Wan and Palpatine represents the Coruscant accent, or rather, the Coruscanti accent. While accents can be linked to certain planets or regions, they have also been known to encompass certain groups of characters. For example, Imperial characters speak with RP British accents, which is just another way of saying standard British. You'll also notice that rebels typically have American accents. However, this is perhaps a representation of social class, as stormtroopers and other low-ranking Imperials speak with American accents, while some rebels such as Mon Mothma speak with British accents. There are of course exceptions to the rule. For example, several high-ranking Imperial officers like Moti very clearly have American accents. Other accents in Star Wars that you probably picked up on include the Russian accent of General Grievous, the Maori accent of the Fett family including the clone troopers, the Mexican accent of Hondo Ohnaka, the working-class English accent of Jakku citizens, the Indian accent of Eth Koth, the Swedish accent of Shmi Skywalker, and the South African accent of the Pantorans. Overall, George Lucas incorporated various accents for several reasons. Not only did he want certain actors to retain their native accents, but he wanted the galaxy far, far away to be as diverse as possible. The prequels contain much more of this than the original trilogy did, and Dave Filoni expanded on this in the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the Bad Batch. Another thing to note is that some accents were hybridized to represent certain regions, individuals, and species. For example, the Middle Eastern Italian hybrid that we hear in Watto. Other examples include the Gungan accent, the Eriaduan accent, the Barabel accent, and so on. Even the Neimoidian accent incorporated both Japanese and Thai pronunciation of Galactic Basic. Now, while George Lucas was trying to create a galaxy that was wide-ranging in terms of cultures and linguistics, many critics in the early 2000s when the prequels came out criticized the films for perpetuating cultural stereotypes. Some even said that it felt too Earth-like and that some audiences would inevitably feel uncomfortable. Most of this criticism faded out by the release of Episode 3. Either way, being the open-minded creative that he is, it's safe to say that George Lucas meant well, even if some elements of representation were complete misfires. But on the whole, the subject of accents in Star Wars remains a relevant one, which is fascinating to say the least. I thank you all so much for checking out today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're brand new, and a huge welcome if you are, and one final time thank you to StarForceOne for helping me to make today's video. I'm Star Wars Meg, wishing you all a phenomenal rest of the day, no matter where you dwell in the galaxy. Have a good one.